Hello and welcome to a news update from the Sustainability Channel. I'm Thomas Stanley and I'm your host. And in today's episode, we're going to focus on the upcoming US election and the candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and their stance on sustainability, climate change, ESG, and similar matters. So let's dig right in. So let's start with Kamala Harris and an article from CBS News. And they say that Harris has yet to outline her plan for climate change. Here's what the Democratic Party platform says. The Democratic Party devoted 7 pages of its 90-page 2024 platform to climate policy, offering a few clues about what Vice President Kamala Harris could do to combat climate change if she wins the presidency. Harris, who only emerged as her party's nominee in mid-July after President Biden dropped out of the race, has not yet articulated her own climate policy. The topic was scarcely mentioned at the Democratic Convention, making the party platform the only guide to what climate policy in a Harris White House might be. During her nearly 40-minute-long address at the Democratic National Convention, she made just one brief reference to the issue in outlining the fundamental freedoms at stake in this election. The freedom to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis. And here are some key takeaways from the party's platform on climate. In keeping with the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act, which made investments in curbing healthcare costs and combating climate change, the Democratic Party's platform calls for the investment in clean energy, such as solar and offshore wind and the electrical grid, with a focus on delivering these technologies to the communities most impacted by climate change. The clean energy boom, the platform says, is projected to triple clean energy generation, cut electricity rates by 9%, and cut gas prices by as much as 13% by 2030. Critics on the Inflation Reduction Act call it a climate slush fund and question whether or not it will meet the ambitious goals outlined by the Biden administration to reduce carbon emissions. A Princeton University study last year estimated the legislation would make a significant dent in curbing emissions, but would fall short of the nation's 2030 climate goals. The platform also calls for the adoption of practices that will bring farming in the US to net zero emissions by 2050, which would make it the first country to do so. USDA data says farming accounted for 10% of US greenhouse gas emissions in 2021. The Democrats also aspire to eliminate the transportation sector's carbon footprint by 2050. Vehicles are responsible for a third of US greenhouse gas emissions. And Democrats say they'll increase funding for the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as for NASA, NOAA, the National Science Foundation, and other agencies to ensure America leads the world in clean energy innovation. The platform also promises to be tough on big oil, as the companies struggle to maintain their grip on the energy industry. Moving forward, the party says it will eliminate tens of billions of dollars in oil and gas subsidies. And Democrats want the US to lead the way in transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy. And a quote here from the platform: "As Democrats, we believe the United States has an indispensable role to play in solving the climate crisis, and we have an obligation to help other nations carry out this work." So let's proceed here to the stance of Donald Trump. And it was difficult to find anything published, but here is an article from Indianapolis Recorder that is writing on both Harris and Trump's environmental policies. And let's have a look what she is writing here under Trump. Trump said in his interview with Elon Musk on X, climate change is not the biggest threat, and rising oceans would create more oceanfront property. Trump has promised to repeal federal regulations to decrease greenhouse gases. Additionally, plans have been made to cut staff/budgets and scale back the government's ability to curb climate change. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 is an outline of policies and regulations by conservatives to get America back on track. The plan is composed of 4 pillars: policies, personnel, training, and actions. But it is important to note that in recent weeks, Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025, but the document is fueling the conservatives' agenda, with many of Trump's first-term allies authoring the narrative. And some of the significant oversight is in the climate and environmental section, which calls for slashing federal money for research in renewable energy. The document says the next president should stop the war on oil and natural gas and focus on increasing energy production. The reduction of carbon would be moved to the back burner. In a report by Energy Innovation, the implementation of Project 2025 would mean the US carbon pollution would increase exponentially. So as of today, there's not that much of policy papers written on Trump's stance, but here's another article from AP, and it's on Harris and Trump offer starkly different visions on climate change and energy. As Vice President, Harris cast a tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which I mentioned earlier, President Joe Biden's landmark climate law that was approved with only Democratic support. As a senator from California, she was an early sponsor of the Green New Deal, a sweeping series of proposals meant to swiftly move the United States to fully green energy that is championed by the party's most progressive wing. Trump, meanwhile, led chants of "drill, baby, drill" and pledged to dismantle the Biden administration's Green New Scam in his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention. He has vowed to boost production of fossil fuels such as oil, natural gas, and coal, and repeal key parts of the 2022 climate law. We have more liquid gold under our feet than any other country by far, Trump said at the convention. We are a nation that has the opportunity to make an absolute fortune with its energy. Environmental groups, which largely back Harris, call her a proven climate champion, who will take on big oil and build on Biden's climate legacy, including policies that boost electric vehicles and limit planet-warming pollution from coal-fired power plants. Republicans counter that Biden and Harris have spent 4 years adopting punishing regulations that target American energy while lavishing generous tax credits for electrical vehicles and other green priorities that cost taxpayers billions of dollars. This onslaught of overreaching and outrageous climate rules will shut down power plants and increase energy costs for families across the country, said the Republican Senator John Barrasso. Republicans will work to stop them and fight for solutions that protect our air and water and allow our economy to grow. And this is also an interesting piece from Reuters, and it's on the red state of Texas, who is being sued over an anti-ESG law. So this is from the 29th of August, and it says that Texas was sued on Thursday by a nonprofit whose members support environmentally friendly policies, and which seeks to block a state law targeting businesses that support reduced reliance on fossil fuels. The American Sustainable Business Council said the 2021 law, known as Senate Bill 13, violates members' free speech rights by banning Texas from investing in or contracting with businesses that, in the state's view, boycott the oil and gas industry. Texas is the largest and among the most prominent Republican-led states to crack down on businesses whose ESG policies it dislikes. It is also easily the largest US oil-producing state. So what needs to be done? This is an opinion piece by the editorial board at the Washington Post. To really tackle climate change, here's what Washington needs to do. 10 years ago, scientists on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projected a worst-case scenario. If the world didn't step up the fight to curb carbon emissions, the global temperature by the end of the century could rise up to 7.8 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. By last year, according to the Rhodium Group, the worst-case scenario had fallen to 4 degrees of warming. The improved outlook is due, in part, to more aggressive climate policies in countries such as the United States and changes in scientists' understanding of how sensitive the climate is to concentrations of greenhouse gases. But one major driver was China. China's vast investment in clean energy technologies such as solar panels and wind turbines has helped push the cost of renewable power into competitive range with fossil fuels, encouraging massive deployment of the devices around the world. Nearly 80% of worldwide carbon emissions between now and the end of the century will likely come from countries outside of the OECD, which includes most rich nations and some middle-income countries. While global emissions have stopped rising, growing demand for energy in these poorer countries is expected to push emissions back up. Washington should encourage the development and spread of technologies that will accelerate decarbonization across the world, most critically across the relatively poor countries that will contribute most of the greenhouse gas emissions in decades to come. Still, the main tool of the US climate policy, the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, pays little attention to decarbonization outside the nation's borders. US politics are still stuck on the notion that contributing to decarbonization in, for instance, India and Bangladesh is foreign aid, a favor rather than a contribution to the well-being of all humans, including Americans. Onerous tariffs on things such as China's cheap solar panels will make decarbonization more expensive in the United States and abroad, as the United States presses other countries to join in raising barriers against China's products. US officials have pressured Mexico to deny incentives for a large plant for electrical vehicles planned by Chinese automaker BYD, which might slow or even scuttle the deal and hinder Mexico's transition from fossil fuels. The global discussion over climate change has been caught up for years in a dead-end argument between rich countries, which resist making sacrifices in the service of decarbonization until poor countries join the effort, and poor countries, which point out that most of the carbon in the atmosphere today was put there by the rich. These positions open opportunity for a deal. Have rich countries pay poor countries for specific verifiable emission cuts. This promises, according to the authors, to provide the cheapest path toward worldwide decarbonization. So let's follow the exciting development of the US election this autumn. That's all for today. Over and out, and live a sustainable life.